5 long years ago, in the drowsy town of Glenwood, while most of its residents were sinking into an after-dinner stupor, the unthinkable happened. The disappearance of 8-year-old Jimmy Rosenberg left the close-knit community shaken and indelibly injured. Jimmy was known for his playful energy that outshone even the sunniest of the Glenwood summers. He was a blur of bounding white blonde hair streaking across the town, in and out of the kitchen doors of friends' homes, leaving ringing laughter in his heart-tugging wake. His piercing blue eyes, filled with an unquenchable thirst for adventure, mirrored his buoyant spirit. The sound of his giggles was as much a part of the town as the rustling of the tall, serene trees that skirted the edges. One somber night, in the quiet serenity of his own backyard, Jimmy was there, and then he wasn't. His parents' calls for dinner echoed through the empty space, each repetition growing more frantic until it was a shrill cry that tore into the veil of tranquility that dressed Glenwood. The silence that replied felt sinister, a chill that swept through every home, creeping into the hearts of every resident, creating an icy dread that no fire could warm. With Jimmy's disappearance, Glenwood underwent a palpable change. The laughter-filled air weighed heavy with worry. Kitchens where Jimmy once playfully begged for snacks and goodies now stood quiet, the aroma of fresh-baked cookies mixing with the scent of fear rather than joy. Parents held their little ones a bit tighter. Whispered reminders to not venture far lingered in the air, an invisible tether keeping the remaining children close. In the heart of Glenwood stood the Rosenberg home at 213 Oakwood Lane, a quaint, 2-story building with a white picket fence, no different from its neighbors. Yet, its silence was louder, an invisible shadow of gloom cast over it. The vibrant bedroom upstairs, still filled with Jimmy's toys, and the backyard with its small football, remained untouched, a painful memorial to the boy who was swiftly taken away. Time painted a veneer of normalcy on the strained faces in town. However, the slow erosion of hope never washed away the memory of that fateful evening. The whispers around the town invariably circled back to Jimmy. And, as it happened in life, another disturbing event a decade ago resurfaced as whispers carried it from year to year. Sleepovers and campfires, once safe havens of adolescent innocence, were now intertwined with the plaguing mystery of the other, Jeff the Killer. The name was a hushed secret shared amongst the adults, a cruel tale passed down from older generations. The echoes of the name hung in Glenwood's air, an eerie hymn interspersed with the rustling of leaves. Even as everyone tried to bury the fear deep, an unmistakable token from the past was discovered on the outskirts of town. A worn-out shoe, one that Jimmy loved for its superhero decals, lay discarded, a chilling message written on its side in dried brownish red. "Go to sleep." The whispered legend of Jeff the Killer was no longer a distant story transported through hushed tones, but a stark reality that had walked back into the heart of Glenwood. The horror of the past and the anguish of the present entwined into one grotesque reality. They were reminded once again of their worst fear. Jeff was back. Deep within the annals of Glenwood's history, buried under the layers of mundane stories of founding fathers and industrial revolutions, lay a tale that caused a shiver down the spine of the eldest townsman. The tale of Jeff, who would eventually become known as the Killer. Jeff Haddock was the boy next door, scarcely different from the average teen who has shared giggles and stolen glances in the town's modest school. His life was as unremarkable as any other teenager's. Amid the strife of adolescence, the bravado, and the anguish, he was just Jeff, with his unkempt sandy hair, freckled cheeks, and a laughter that was more infectious than the flu during winters. One afternoon, an unfortunate event shifted the ordinary tides of Jeff's life into a relentless storm. He was involved in an incident that scarred his face beyond recognition. In the privacy of his own despair, Jeff's sanity teetered on the edge before it plunged into the abyss. The boy who came out of that tragic crucible was no longer Jeff the teenager, but the birth of a horrifying legend, Jeff the Killer. Beneath his bandages, a transformation had occurred. His face was of an unnerving pallor, the color of life having departed as if scared away. His eyebrows were no longer a part of him, leaving his gaze empty, constantly wide and manic, devoid of humanity's blink that affirms life. His eyes bore an endless stare, haunting and unsettling, a pair of abysses where the light of sanity had died. But what became Jeff's most defining and terrifying feature was his mouth. It appeared as a wide, blood-curdling smile that stretched grotesquely across his once boyish face, reached almost to the sides of his face. It was a grimace that tormented souls in their dreams, making the very concept of sleep a horror to the innocent minds. This smile didn't spring from joy but was rooted in insidious madness, a reminder of his chilling transition. The story of Jeff seeped into every brick of Glenwood, into every old tree's bark, into every creaking floorboard. His ghostly apparition seems to lurk in and around the corners, casting an ominous shadow on the town. As time passed, he morphed into the invisible boogeyman of Glenwood. The adults, hushed and pale, shrank away from his name, but the shock of the tale was too potent not to trickle down to the younger ones. No matter how deep the town tried to bury the horrors of the past, Glenwood lived under the immortal specter of Jeff, a legend too terrifying to fade into the hush of time. His mere name stirred a cold gust of fear that swept down the quiet lanes, gnawing at the town's peace. The town bore an invisible wound, a lingering pain that couldn't be eased. Even the town's heartbeat seemed to slow in dread at his mention. Nestled against the backdrop of this gruesome legend, Glenwood existed under an unsaid pact of silence, an attempt to preserve its innocence. Yet this would soon be shattered when Jeff's signature, the chilling phrase, "Go to sleep," was discovered painted in sinister, dried brownish red on Jimmy's abandoned shoe. The echoes of the past seemed to collide into the present, reopening forgotten wounds, ushering in a fresh wave of fear. For the people of Glenwood, Jeff had returned. In the powerlessness of the dawn following the discovery of Jimmy's shoe, the townspeople of Glenwood found unity in their shared fear. Jeff's ominous tagline, "Go to sleep," painted in dried reddish-brown font resurrected the ghost they had tried to banish to the outskirts of their memory. They looked at each other uneasily, the crisp morning air thick with panic and dark forebodings. Sheriff Tom Barton, a thick-set man with grim eyes that bore witness to countless miseries, took a long, mournful look at Jimmy's shoe before lifting his gaze to address the crowd. His voice, roughened by age and the heavy weight of his duty, echoed through the silent congregation. "We believed, had hoped, that we were free from the old nightmares. Hoped it was all behind us," he began, truth lying heavy in every syllable. "But it appears we are faced with them once again. We won't just stand idle, though, we're going to search every corner, every shadow of Glenwood till we find Jimmy." A ripple of determination filtered through the townspeople. They nodded their support, exchanging grim looks of resolve. Their fear was potent, palpable, but so was their obstinate refusal to let it consume them. For Jimmy and the peace of their town, they would confront their decades-old terror. Search teams were quickly assembled, each crammed with volunteers unversed in the art of finding a person, yet driven by a desperation to bring Jimmy back. From the dusty woods fringed by autumn leaves to the dimly lit corners of the local school, nothing was left untouched. The haunting echoes of Jeff's past swelled in their mind, but the townsfolk drew strength from their unity, pressing on with their forced bravery to pierce through the fog of uncertainty. Meanwhile, the hollow Rosenberg residence at 213 Oakwood Lane was swallowed whole by despair. The family tragedy had turned the vibrant house into a desolate shrine of their lost son. Bittersweet memories hung heavily from every corner, a white noise of grief that drowned all else. But within this malarkey, the Rosenbergs carried a spark of hope still. A hope that refused to die, stubborn against the currents of reality, fueled by a mother's love and a father's tenacity. Their eyes were strained from maintaining a tireless vigil at the window, looking out for a streak of blonde or the echo of a childish laughter. Their hearts ached with boundless love and fear, yet refused to buckle under the weight of despair. Their home and hearts echoed the same sentiment. Their wait for Jimmy was perpetual, their faith in his return unwavering. As the days fell to nights and rose again, the search continued, the town's desperation increasing with each passing hour. The chilling words on Jimmy's shoe had immersed them in their worst nightmare, and they were trapped in it until their boy was found. Frantic mothers clung closer to their children, and the fathers patrolled their lawns more vigilantly. Hope was a fragile thread they clung to, but in the face of the impending shadows of the past, it only seemed to get thinner. In the midst of fear, the legend of Jeff the Killer was reborn, once myth morphing into haunting reality. The residents of Glenwood were tormented by a ghost this Halloween, one that wasn't interested in sweets but fed on their fear. The terrifying smile of their past had crept into their present, its reappearance prompting a crosstown search like no other. For every brave soul in Glenwood, the fight for peace was on. The hunt for Jeff had only just begun. While the town organized tirelessly during the day, the night was another beast to reckon with. The darkness stretched its cold and spine-chilling fingers around Glenwood, transforming the quaint town into a sinister shadow of its daytime self. Every creak and hush in the night was a potential sign of the lurking terror they knew as Jeff, causing the fear to bloom rampant and insidious across the silent hours. Stories of Jeff started to circulate again, whispered between mothers in candlelit living rooms, and hissed between the elders at the corner grocery store. Huddled in their homes, the town fell prey to the ghosts of their collective memories, white-knuckled and wide-eyed, listening for any sign of the monster that had once roamed their quiet streets. This escalating wave of terror gave birth to the Night Watch, an assembly of willing and brave townsmen who pledged to guard their town as the others slept. They were led by Roger Weiss, an inconspicuous mailman by day but a man of iron will and courage come nightfall. With his watchful eyes and steely resolve, Roger was the beacon of hope the town clung onto. Even as the glowing moon ascended the sky, the Night Watch buckled up to patrol the silent landscapes of Glenwood. Armed with flashlights, the men scanned every corner, every alley, and every dark shadow for any sign of Jimmy or the chilling specter of Jeff. Despite the biting cold and the heart-pounding fear, they fought on through the night, fueled by their shared drive to protect their close-knit community. However, it wasn't the adults alone whose fears ran rampant. As the children were tucked into their beds, the legend of Jeff hung heavy over their minds, transforming their nightly dreams into terrifying nightmares. The lingering echoes of steps outside their homes, the shadows dancing against their bedroom walls, all signified the presence of an unseen horror. Their innocent hearts bore the older generation's scar, Jeff's legacy of fear seeping into even the town's youngest inhabitants. 8-year-old Katie Mills was among the many children falling prey to their imaginations. Every night she would peer under her bed and in her closet before going to sleep, a ritual born out of the fear of what she had heard about Jeff. One night, as Katie tightly clung to her teddy bear, she heard a haunting whisper that made her blood run cold. "Go to sleep." The words seeped into her bedroom, slithering like a cold shiver, barely louder than the whistle of wind outside her window. But unmistakably it was there. The echo of Jeff's signature chill tirade horrified Katie. She clutched her stuffed bear tighter, staring at her window whose blinds danced slightly with the wind, her heart pounding. Katie wasn't alone in experiencing an inkling of Jeff's presence that night. Across Glenwood, curtains dove into disarray with whispers, the moonlight casting long, eerie shadows that threatened to morph into that terrifying smirk they all knew too well. It wasn't just a memory anymore. The fear was real, immediate. Amid the scared populace, the town's leaders knew they had to act fast. The Night Watch, the search for Jimmy, and comforting the town's children had to go hand in hand. Given the rising fear, they knew it was only a matter of time before the town spiraled into chaos. With an overwhelming fear looming over the town, Glenwood's tale began to turn grimmer with each passing day. A newfound chapter had opened in its history, incited by the reappearance of their collective nightmare, Jeff the Killer. The town stood at the forefront of fear, scars of their past pricking their present and threatening their future, and the only way out was through the chilling darkness ahead. Deputy Sarah Campbell, the heartbeat of Glenwood's police department, found herself at the center of the investigation. Tom Barton, the sheriff, had given her the daunting task of deciphering the clues left behind by Jeff, the shoe and the hauntingly familiar message. As a Glenwood native, Sarah's connection to town was like a blood bond. The distress sown in her community by Jimmy's disappearance, and the resurfacing of Jeff was more than a professional challenge, it was personal. Sarah, with her hawkish gaze and unwavering tenacity, started combing through the evidence in her quest to locate Jimmy and put an end to the escalating horror. Her spirit, fierce and bold, was undeterred by the mounting fear around her. Amid the frenzied discussion in the town hall meetings and the chilling silence of the night watches, her sharp mind was a beacon, relentlessly hunting for any threads that would weave together the current terror's fabric. She spent countless nights poring over the dusty archives of the local library, picking apart the town's past struggle with Jeff. She noted every incident, every victim, every chilling narrative that was once deemed a tall tale. She sought to understand the enigma known as Jeff the Killer, believing that decoding his patterns from the past could help prevent more victims in the future. The mysterious message on Jimmy's shoe, "Go to sleep," only fueled her determination. It was a brutal invocation, a chilling signature that Jeff had left behind years ago. The same phrase had been spouted at several of Jeff's previous victims, casting an ominous shadow over the investigation. She wondered what he might have wanted with Jimmy, a kid no older than her little brother, and the notion sent a shiver coursing down her spine. Meanwhile, the search efforts for Jimmy continued unabated. In the sprawling woods, under the crumbling bridges, within the abandoned houses on Baker Street, the determined townsfolk's unease was palpable. The chilling autumn winds whispered their condolences, and the rustling leaves grieved in the quiet. There was a shared dread that perhaps they wouldn't find Jimmy safe and sound. But the shimmering hope in every heart refused to dim, harnessing the collective strength of Glenwood to press on. Amid the turmoil of investigation and search efforts, the Rosenberg family stood like a fortress, still holding on to hope despite the pain that was eroding them from inside out. Hope was their last refuge, and they clung onto it with everything they had. Their anguish was heartrending, but seeing the town come together for their son filled their hearts with gratitude and a renewed determination to find Jimmy. There was a subtle shift in Glenwood as the days rolled on. Every night whispered new frights, and every dawn revealed an invigorated community. The fear was there, certainly. Yet wrapped within it was a strengthening resolve built from collective adversity, a hopeful defiance that spoke volumes of the human spirit. Sarah's investigation forged ahead, her instincts sharp and her mind clear amid the tumult. There was a pattern somewhere in the chaos, some pieces of the puzzle scattered in the old legends and the echoing whispers of the town. Clues were obscured in the shadows, and Sarah knew she was on a path that, if navigated correctly, could be their salvation. Unbeknownst to Sarah, these shadows held more than just terrifying whispers. They held the key to deciphering Jeff's return and possibly rescuing Jimmy. She vowed to leave no stone unturned, no shadow unexplored, until safety returned to Glenwood and Jimmy was brought back home. The nightmare had taken a gripping hold of Glenwood, but instead of shattering under the weight of terror, the town's formidable spirit held strong. The chase was on, and Glenwood was ready, more than ever, to confront the shadow of Jeff the Killer. For Glenwood to face the present nightmare, they had to revisit the past. The town elders became the stewards of their shared history, reopening old stories that had been tucked away for far too long. The townsfolk gathered to hear them, their eyes filled with trepidation, hearts pounding in their chests. The young listened with wide-eyed horror, the adults with a grim sense of déjà vu. They all knew the monster by name, Jeff the Killer. Grandma Millie, 82 years old and the oldest resident in Glenwood, became their storyteller. Her wrinkled face, marked by time, bore a strength that defied her age. She had faced Jeff once before and lived to tell the story. As she recounted her experience, a hush fell over the room, an aura of profound attention enveloping the scene. On a winter night many years ago, Jeff had terrorized her home. Her description of the night was terrifyingly vivid. The shrill sound of shattering glass, bizarre laughter echoing through the dark, and the sight of Jeff's white, ghost-like face appearing from the shadows. He had left her unscathed but took something far greater, her peace of mind. The townsfolk listened, their hearts heavy with dread. Each story, each recollection, tore open the town's old wounds, inciting a fresh wave of terror. Yet, within the fear, there was a palpable spike of collective determination to ensure history would not repeat itself. With the fragments of information from the elders' tales, the town's resident historian, Mr. Edwards, started to dig deeper into Jeff's patterns from the past. Jeff's symphony of terror seemed to have a twisted rhythm to it, a sinister pattern hidden within. By day, Mr. Edwards pored over newspaper clippings, old police reports, and dusty journals in his attempt to identify any consistent traits in Jeff's previous appearances. The Rosenberg family, in the midst of their heart-wrenching loss, found solace in the town's solidarity. Every echo of their struggle was met with an echo of support, an echo of shared determination, an echo of hope. Their faith in finding their son alive didn't waver despite the growing darkness. As Glenwood painstakingly pieced together the details of its haunting past, Deputy Sarah Campbell was feeding the fresh information into her ongoing investigation. The words of Grandma Millie, the insights from Mr. Edwards, and her tireless examination of contemporary clues started to form a terrifying yet vital picture. Jeff's legendary appearance hadn't changed, his ghostly pale face, the manic grin, the black eyes, but his methods had evolved. The message on Jimmy's shoe was a significant departure from previous instances. Understanding that Jeff's patterns could be critical, Sarah's exploration for connections grew even more desperate. Every whisper of past terror, every imprint left behind by the antagonist offered a breadcrumb on the path to unraveling the mystery. In her mind, she began to conceive potential traps, a spider weaving its web in anticipation of the prey. Only this time, the predator was not an ordinary spider, but a nightmare that came to life when the moon took over the sky. As the 6th day since Jimmy's disappearance dawned, Glenwood, shaken but spirited, rose to face it. The echoes from the past lingered in the air, feeding the beast of fear and yet nourishing the dare to confront it. The deciphering of shadows, the journey through memory lanes, and the heart-thumping search painted a picture of a town not ready to succumb to its terror. They embraced the day with a newfound resolution. The echoes from Glenwood's past would not decide its future. This was their town, and they would protect it at all costs. As the old saying goes, "The night is darkest just before the dawn." That evening, Glenwood seemed a town raised from a Gothic tale, waiting for the dawn that seemed ever elusive. The week of anxious nights had culminated into a particularly chilling evening, the air heavy with tension and unspoken fears. But Sarah's radiant determination was undulled, her resolve basaltic in the face of the unfolding dark tableau. Sarah's police work took on a quasi-personal aspect. Jeff the killer, known or unknown to him, had become her most despised adversary. The stolen piece of the tranquil town, the fear implanted in the hearts of her people, and more than anything, the innocent life at stake, all these ignited a fire in Sarah. She was in a lethal dance with the dreaded ghost from Glenwood's past. Steeled with the spirit of relentless pursuit, she devoted herself to untangling the elusive web of deceit spun by Jeff. The variety of pieces filling her investigative puzzle was vast and mosaic-like. An old photograph provided by Grandma Millie, an eerily similar tale from decades ago, and the hauntingly familiar message found on Jimmy's shoe became keystones in the emerging pattern. As days lapsed into nights, she found herself immersed in a twisted mix of yesteryear horrors and present-day nightmares. Meanwhile, Glenwood was silent, a pause hanging over it like the silence before the storm. Policemen patrolled the streets, their eyes piecing the dark corners for any sign of Jeff or Jimmy. The town meetings, once a place of jovial community discussions, had turned into congregations of hushed voices, and worried countenances echoing the overall pallor of fear. The Rosenberg family continued their war against brewing despair. Mr. Rosenberg, with grim determination etched on his face, joined the search parties, overcoming the frantic fear in his heart. He scoured the haunting woods and peeked into long-abandoned buildings, praying for a glimpse of his son, alive and safe. Mrs. Rosenberg spent her days near the phone, eyes glued to the clock, a candle of hope eternally lit in her heart, waiting for the call that would restore her world. On the 7th night since Jimmy's disappearance, an unexpected breakthrough occurred. Deputy Sarah Campbell, in her desperate quest for clues, stumbled upon a detail she'd missed before, a minor anomaly that had occurred around the same time during Jeff's previous reign of terror. A particular house on Baker Street, now abandoned, had been targeted multiple times by Jeff years ago. Realizing the significance of this potential pattern, she felt a flicker of hope ignite in her chest. By the break of dawn, Sarah, backed by the Glenwood police force, was marching towards Baker Street. The quiet morning offered a sharp contrast to their grim determination, as each officer sported a pair of steel-gray eyes set on the dilapidated house standing eerily in the morning fog. With hearts pounding in collective anticipation, they approached the abandoned property, each step echoing their unison, the deafening sound of their shared resolve. Was the Baker Street house a part of Jeff's intricate web? Was there a clue waiting for them, a signal to trace Jimmy's whereabouts? As the old wooden door creaked open, Glenwood held its breath, hoping against hope that the coming hours would bring an end to their torment. Unfolding tensions, new revelations, and a relentless fight against time marked the 7th chapter of Glenwood's current horror. But this was not a community that would buckle under pressure. They were prepared to stand up, rise against their fears, and march into the web of deceit to reclaim their peace and their Jimmy. The old Baker Street house stood like a gargoyle perched in the morning mist. Its time-worn facade gave off an impending sense of dread. Deputy Sarah Campbell, staring at the ominous structure before her, swallowed her anxiety, careful not to let it show. She knew the importance of maintaining her composure. Her bravery was a beacon to those around her. With a forceful push, Sarah opened the old door, its groans echoing eerily in the quiet of the morning. As they stepped into the house, the officers were met by a cold gust. The house seemed frozen in time, its dilapidated appearance a silent testament to its history. The team spread out, each room probed with meticulous detail. Every corner, every crevice, every ink-stained paper found in the abandoned rooms underwent careful examination. Hours passed, with the fruitless search breeding a sense of frustration. Just when the daunting silence began to breed a wave of disappointment, one of the officers, a young and eager recruit, Jeremy, made a startling discovery. Beneath the worn-out floorboard in what once was a child's bedroom, he found a box. It was wooden, old, and covered in a thick layer of dust. All in all, nothing unusual for an abandoned house. But what was inside sent a jolt through the entire team. Photographs. Dozens of them. They were old, their color washed out, edges frayed. They all showed children playing, laughing, and enjoying their innocent lives. But it was the similarity in the pictures, the same ghostly figure observed lurking in the shadows, that made their hearts hammer in their chests. It was him. Jeff. Not just that, one of the pictures matched an occurrence Grandma Millie had mentioned during her narration of the past. It was a missing child case from the past, found alive and scared but without any physical harm. Astonishingly, the eerie figure in the background was undoubtedly Jeff, immortalized on film. A collectively held breath was released as a newfound urgency filled the room. Sarah's mind raced as she quickly scribbled down a theory, the disturbing pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place. Jeff had a way of returning to places he'd visited before. He marked his victims, played his sick games with them, but somehow, the majority were found alive. The revelation at the Baker Street house provided the much-needed shift in perspective. Sarah speculated that Jeff's patterns were evolving, but not homicide-centered as they had assumed. It was a perverse game, chilling, certainly, but now predictable to some extent. She immediately ordered searching of the houses that had been subjected to Jeff's terror before and had also been revisited in the past. The searches began in earnest, with the hope of rescuing Jimmy alive rekindled in their hearts. Meanwhile, the news spread through Glenwood like wildfire. Citizens, who had so far been huddled in their homes, now held their heads a bit higher. The fear, still present, had been pushed down by a resurgent hope. Prayers were once again filling the small town chapel, and candles were lit in each house, for Jimmy's return, for Sarah's success, and for the victory of their indomitable spirit over the consuming fear. The 8th chapter closes with Sarah and her team emerging resolute from the Baker Street house, holding on to a relic of Glenwood's past, containing both their darkest fear and brightest hope. With a frightful past, a tormented present, and an uncertain future, Glenwood stood united as never before. A town burdened by a terrifying history was now poised on the brink of revelation, ready to confront its lurking demons head-on. Just as sunrise dispels the darkness, so too did the discoveries at Baker Street begin to cast light on the once mysterious workings of Jeff the Killer. The sun peaked above the horizon as Sarah and her team, clutching the newly discovered photographs, dove into the labyrinth of old case files. Each file was combed through, each victim's house visited, and each room scoured for clues. The ghostly figure of Jeff seemed to loom over each photo, each house, each familiar disappearance. But now, he began to seem less like an omnipotent spectral force, and more like a man trapped in the throes of his strange, perverse game. The veil of fear began to lift from Glenwood, replaced by cautious hope. Mr. Rosenberg, buoyed by this new development, joined the police in their investigation, his paternal dedication enduring through the tears and the turmoil. Armed with maps, lists, and undying resolve, they charted the course that Jeff seemed to have set. As the flurry of activity heightened, there came a sudden call from the precinct. Another house that Jeff had previously targeted was reporting a sighting. The officers rushed to the scene, hearts pounding with dread and hope in equal measure. It was an old mansion at the end of Partridge Lane, slightly isolated from the rest of the town. The mentioning of a child's laughter put the entire force on high alert. Entering the mansion was like plunging into a deranged dollhouse. Slightly dilapidated toys littered the scene, each one strange in its own way, some resembling the innocent victims of the past. They carefully prowled the echoing halls, a chilling laughter occasionally lacing the silence that hung ominously much like the cobwebs in the mansion. In the attic, they found a small room. Inside was an old cassette player, still running, looping the ringing laughter of a child. The room had been converted into a strange playroom. Drawings were crudely scribbled over the walls, chilling graphics displaying children with an oddly smiling figure, eerily similar to Jeff's descriptions. What buzzed in everyone's ear was not the chilling sight but a glimmering piece of hope. Could this be the place where Jimmy was kept? A feeling of anticipation filled the attic as the law enforcement team took in the surroundings. While they found no immediate trace of Jimmy, there was enough to suggest he had been there. More importantly, it gave them something they hadn't had until now, a tangible step ahead in this chilling game of Jeff's. Throughout Glenwood, a frenzied hope fueled the townsfolk. Candlelight vigils peppered the town landscape as night fell, and the local chapel was packed to the rafters with praying citizens. Conversations revolving around fear and terror began to shift towards hope and rescue. Back in the Rosenberg home, Mrs. Rosenberg lit yet another candle, this one a little different. Alongside the wick of anxiety and hope, a tender flare of relief seemed to burn. She chained her prayers with other mothers, friends, and well-wishers, hoping for the happy laughter of her child to once again fill her home. As the 9th chapter of Glenwood's dreadful episode drew to a close, the turbulence seemed to ease a fraction. Sarah, armed with new leads and burning determination, felt the weight of uncertainty lifting. Despite the chill of Jeff's perverse game lingering, the hope of a new dawn seemed to loom in the horizon. The future chapters awaited to be written, bearing promises of revelation, rescue, and reclamation. The morning fog was denser than usual, the day hiding behind its thickness. Yet, the town of Glenwood was more alive than ever. The discovery at the old mansion had renewed their hopes, the town rallying around Sarah and her team. News traveled fast, and as the day broke, whispers of a potential rescue mission spread. Sarah stood facing the map penciled with pins and lines. They had plotted Jeff's game, a path drawn in both ink and dread. With careful consideration, she ordered her team to surround a few specific locations they presumed could serve as Jeff's hideouts. Lights were dimmed, voices hushed down, the veil of silence only broken on occasion by the squelch of the radios. Glenwood was ready for their final act. 2 of the locations turned up empty. However, the third one, a deserted factory on the outskirts of town, held promise. A fleet of law enforcement vehicles sat in shadowy silence at a distance, their occupants waiting for Sarah's cue. The silence was deafening as Sarah, followed by 10 brave officers, advanced toward the factory. Inside, the echoes of their footsteps reverberated off the high ceilings, punctuating the chilling silence. The gloom inside was partially dispelled by flashlights that scanned the environment, revealing discarded child's toys, just like in the mansion. The tension rose palpably as they descended a set of rusted stairs leading to a large, lower room. Held in the beam of the flashlight, they saw him, Jimmy Rosenberg, bound and blindfolded, but alive and unharmed. Jeff, however, was nowhere to be seen. Sarah swiftly moved forward, untying the terrified but relieved boy, the room bursting in a silent cheer. Jimmy, though shaken from his ordeal, was quickly wrapped in a protective blanket of law enforcement, reassuring words spoken to ease his worries. The radio crackled to life, the words, "Child found, safe and unharmed," echoed, sending waves of jubilation through the town. Simultaneously, an officer found a sloppy signature of Jeff, a hastily written note. The words, filled with deranged satisfaction about another game well played, and a promise to return, sent chills down their spine. But amidst the fear of this exposure to their ghosts, Jeff's departure filled them with relief. They had won for now. The news of Jimmy's rescue changed everything. A collective sigh passed through the town, silence giving way to cheers of joy. Spontaneous celebrations erupted on the streets. No one bothered about the early hour. The relief was profound, the joy unimaginable. The Rosenberg household was filled with tears of joy and relief, as they embraced their son after the harrowing separation. As for the rest of Glenwood, their fears subsided, replaced by newfound strength and unity, a common resolve to stand up against Jeff if he dared to return. The dread that had coiled around their hearts for weeks finally loosened its grip. Sarah, standing at the break of dawn, a tired but satisfied smile adorning her face, knew the battle against Jeff was far from being over, but this victory had provided them a beacon of hope that he could be anticipated and possibly thwarted. As the final chapter closed, it marked the end of a horrifying ordeal, but also the beginning of a resilient community's narrative. Their resilience had shattered the shackles of fear, their unity had brought them victory over the unseen enemy. They knew Jeff might return, but they also knew they would be ready. Glenwood had emerged, its spirit unbroken, the morning mist had finally lifted.